So far in the 2018-19 NHL season, Auston Matthews and John Tavares have been a two-man wrecking crew leading the NHL in goals. In this video, I want to compare this year's version of the Toronto Maple Leafs against last year's, and also take a look at their goals against that they're allowing. Is this a recipe for a championship, or should the Leafs have some concerns? We'll discuss all that coming up next. Hey everyone, and welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. If you're new to the channel, thanks for stopping by. We review and discuss all 31 NHL teams, so if you're a huge hockey fan, consider subscribing and clicking the bell so you don't miss anything. So as I mentioned off the top, Auston Matthews and John Tavares have been an awesome two-man wrecking crew for the Toronto Maple Leafs, scoring in great bunches here so far, both at the top of the NHL in goals for. Auston Matthews has so far scored 7 goals, while Tavares has got 6. So obviously these two guys are scoring in bunches, and so far the Leafs are doing pretty well with a 3-1 record. But they're also giving up a lot of goals, and I want to take a little bit of time here to compare this version of the Toronto Maple Leafs against last year's team. As we know, this team's gone through a lot of changes over the past 2018 offseason here. Bringing in John Tavares was obviously by far the biggest move, but they also had a lot of players who left the Leafs and are onto other teams. So this team is a fair bit different this year compared to last. But there's one problem that still is the same from last year, and they're still giving up way too many goals against, and the overall team defense is just not strong enough right now, and in my opinion, long term is not sustainable and likely will catch up to them. Now, as we know, when the season kicks off in October, especially over the last few years here, we've seen an increase in scoring. Team defense also gets better as time goes on as well, and teams get adjusted to playing their opponents. And we usually do see scoring take a little bit of a dip down after the first few weeks or month or so of the season. So obviously over time here, this very well could change for the Leafs. But if you compare their first 4 games this year against their first 4 games last year, there's a lot of similarities, but there is one big major difference. So let's take a quick look at the breakdown here. So far this year, the Toronto Maple Leafs have scored 20 goals in 4 games, but they've also given up 17. If you take a look at last year's version of the Toronto Maple Leafs, at this point they actually scored 22 goals and had allowed 16. So last year's version of the Toronto Maple Leafs actually scored a couple more goals and had a slightly better differential. The one other big difference here is this year's version of the Leafs is all coming from Matthews and Tavares, whereas last year's Leafs team had a much more scoring balance. They were getting a lot more scoring from their depth players all up and down their lineup, as well as from the back end. Whereas this year, with Matthews having 7 and Tavares having 6, that's 13 out of 20 goals from just 2 players. They have a lot of guys who have yet to score their first goal of the year, and they have many others who only have 1 so far. So for me, as well as Matthews and Tavares are playing, that does offer some concerns that they're not getting enough other additional scoring throughout their lineup here. So far this season, the Toronto Maple Leafs have given up 125 shots on goal, which is a little bit high, but it's not completely terrible. At this point last year, after 4 games, they had given up 124 shots on goal, so very, very similar year over year. In both scenarios, both years didn't end up with a great save percentage or goals against average for those 4 games. Obviously, giving up that many shots and the number of goals in each of those games, it's certainly not great. This year, they had allowed 4.25 goals per game as well, while having a save percentage well under 900. Now, this time last year, the save percentage as a team was also under 900 and averaged at 4 goals per game. So they're actually allowing slightly more this year than they did last year, while actually scoring as a team a little bit less as well. So even though the two-headed monster of Matthews and Tavares are going at a phenomenal rate, and they very well could have some tremendous individual seasons, that does give me cause for concern here that over time this is going to catch up to them and certainly may hamper their championship aspirations. By this point last season, the Toronto Maple Leafs had 13 different goal scorers register at least 1 goal, whereas this year they only have 7. So that's pretty much half of the scores that they have this year so far compared to last. With the big change in the lineup, adding Tavares and Matthews, the top 2 lines are certainly getting a lot of ice time. Even guys like Nazem Kadri's production is down, and so is his ice time, which kind of goes hand in hand here. At the same time, their team defense has not been great on the back end. Morgan Rielly's having a tremendous offensive season, so you can certainly give him a little bit of slack for any defensive mishaps. But the other D pairs, though, are certainly giving up too many shots against as well as goals against, and just not playing strong enough defensively, which is long term here could be an issue for this team. So as we know, the Leafs have a lot of players on last year's roster that are no longer with the team, including James Van Riemsdyk and Leo Komarov and Tyler Bozak, just to name a few. They've also had a few other guys leave town on the defensive side of the game, like Roman Polak and Connor Carrick, who was just recently traded to the Dallas Stars as well, and he's off to a good start with them. So with all the guys that left town during the offseason for the Maple Leafs, and even though they added a big superstar like John Tavares, is their overall depth really still as strong as it has been in the past? As over the last couple of years, we've seen the Leafs kind of go from a rebuilding team up to a playoff team, and at this point, they're trying to get over that hump and get past the first round of the playoffs. Now, I know many people are predicting them to be one of the contenders for the Stanley Cup this year. I know the EA Sports simulation had them winning the Stanley Cup. If you look at the odds on favorites to win the Cups from a lot of the Vegas bookies, they're pretty high ranked as well. So they're certainly considered by many to be a favorite. But at this point, with this type of defensive play and the number of goals they're allowing, it certainly gives me a lot of cause for concern that that's certainly not going to be something that's likely possible without some significant change here. So what do the Leafs do? As we also know, the Maple Leafs are having a contract situation with William Nylander. We've discussed that on other videos here, discussing the possibilities of things that could happen. Do they end up signing him, or do they end up trading him? Obviously, they can only pay him so much while keeping the rest of the team intact. We know Auston Matthews is going to command a big contract. So is Mitch Marner. In order to keep them all together, as Brendan Shanahan said, they're all going to have to take a little bit of a hometown discount in order to kind of keep the band together. And that might not be possible if they're not all individually willing to play ball. It kind of depends on what's more important to them. So as much as Auston Matthews and John Tavares are off to a tremendous start, I think they're motivating each other. You can see they're trying to keep up with each other as well, which is great for the team, which is also good for them individually. They're scoring in bunches, and right now they're certainly able to score themselves to victory. We've seen their recent games against teams like Chicago and Dallas, where even later in the game, when the opponent was continuing to come back and tie things up, they kept scoring more bunches and kind of pulling ahead. So they do have that ability to score themselves to a victory right now. But as the season goes on, as teams adapt to their systems and kind of become more defensively sound, that is going to become more and more difficult, especially once we reach playoff time. So can the Maple Leafs be a championship contender with this type of goals against right now, or what type of moves do they need to make in order to make this team more defensively sound? I know Freddie Anderson is a pretty good goaltender, and I don't think you can put too much of this on him. I think last year he kind of had a slower start statistically as well, but I think a lot of that can be blamed on the overall team defense, which is certainly a big part of that. So what I'd like to hear from you down in the comment section, I want your opinion on the Maple Leafs this year versus last. Are they really that much stronger of a team with John Tavares, even though they have all these other guys who are no longer with the club? Yes, they're scoring in bunches, but really compared to last year's club, they're actually down a little bit, and they're getting a lot less significant scoring from their depth players. So long term here, is that actually a better team, and do they have better odds of being a championship contender? Or what do they need to do here to improve their overall team defense to cut down on so many shots and goals against? If you're new to the channel here, I hope you consider subscribing. We cover all 31 NHL teams, and there's plenty of content here for all hockey fans to enjoy. So if you're new, hit that subscribe button, and don't forget to hit the like button as well. I'd appreciate it if you did. As always, thank you very much for watching, everybody. We will catch you next time.